couple things I wanted to share, and then I'm introducing Chris McMurray to talk to you about the digital learning experience standards. Couple background items, because we haven't shared this yet in this 2-day event for the Northeast yet. When we did our national survey, we found that in 2020, the total spend on technology spiked by 7.5 billion. Now that was part of CARES Act 1. Certainly not all the CARES Act has been moving through the market yet. And then there's CARES Act 2, which is coming. Very few places have it. I've heard Washington, D.C. has their allocation already, but it's 4 times the size of CARES Act 1. And now I think it's today they're signing the third big round of stimulus, which is got I think it's 132 billion in it for education, which will be 10 times the size of CARES Act 1. So it's really a significant tsunami of money. It will probably take 3 years at the bottom to spend it all. There are superintendents that we're hearing on back channels that are saying, we don't know what to do with all this money. That's what we really want to make sure people understand, is that we're in a moment of real transformation, not tack on only, not augment only. Really start thinking about your overarching architecture of everything you do. I'm setting this all up for you, Chris. All right, so hardware and major system spend last year ticked up by 4.5 billion. There was a mad scramble even to find enough devices to issue to all the students that still needed them in America. We think it'll continue to increase by another 400 million this year. That includes major systems, all the LMSs that are being sold now. Digital versus paper this last year, paper again down. This was a $25 billion market, paper resources were only 8 years ago. So wow, way down. Digital curriculum spend ticked up by 2.1 billion. A lot of people looking for professional resources, learning object repositories, things that are ebooks and widgety things and apps and everything else. So we think that'll uptick again by another 2 billion, because the first thing a lot of newbies did in their deployments was they just used Google or Microsoft, and that was it. They don't even have an LMS yet, and they're buying apps willy-nilly. So the consumer market comparison was that this market, K-12, still is only at 13.1 billion, still a big uptick, but in comparison to what the consumers did at the start of the pandemic, it's nothing, right? Really, really huge upticks in April, May, June. Parents were shopping. That market was starting to slow and then took off in the pandemic very significantly. We may be being conservative with this. These are sites that, maybe they sell, like BrainPop sells, also Achieve 3000, other companies, Accelerate Learning, tons of companies, they also sell to the consumer space, but they sell to the, schools as well. Then there's a ton of them that only sell to consumers, and you'll never hear of them in the K-12 space. So that is one of the big pressure points coming at schools, is the reality that parents and students have on professional grade navigation, learning sequencing, animation, algorithmic inference, recommendations engines, those things embedded into the experience by the student rather than by hand manipulating around Word documents and PowerPoints and PDFs. Very different experience, and the expectations are rising. I'm going to hand this over to Chris to jump in and start talking to you about what's going on with the digital learning experience standards.
For sure. Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, that's fascinating information for us to kind of put our minds around because it's directly connected. I mean, all the things that we're struggling with right now in terms of learning loss, all of the hot points for folks out there. It's time for us to start winnowing that down and understanding and allowing some structure so that we can move forward in a mindful way and actually start to tackle some of the opportunities that this actually presents, because it's a great thing, right? I mean, you can look at this as a half full, half empty kind of a thing, and it's for sure half full as long as we take advantage of all of the great stuff that we have. I mean, yeah. Tim Beekman and his team are doing some fantastic things, and it ties right in as a segue to what we're kind of going to go over this afternoon. So I'm Chris McMurray.
You have mouse control?
One moment. I think I do. Wait for it.
Just gonna see if you can move them. Yeah, move it forward.
Yep, working on
There
it.
you
Oh,
go.
there we go. Perfect. Awesome.
Okay.
So I'm working with the EduJedi Leadership, and I'm super excited to be with you guys today because what I want to do is jump into what will probably be a rapid fire bit of information, cruising over the top, and to start dipping into some major concepts in terms of how we understand and move forward from the point at which we find ourselves now. And as of last March, we're dumped into the deep end with. And so essentially there's four things that we're going to talk about today. And one of those is that are critical in terms of moving forward. One of those is really identifying and understanding the types of things that we have now populated our ecosystems with. We need to make sure that we have a clear understanding and a basis of knowledge for that. We want to establish some common vocabulary. As we all know, in terms of facilitating change and moving systems, that common vocab is really pretty critical, so that people don't have misunderstandings. Personalized learning is one of those that's widely misunderstood or had been for a long time until we had some really some good definitions to sort of put our brains around. We're also going to understand professional responsibilities, and that's a key, and this is a new point of discussion that we at the Learning Council and the EduJedi have been developing. And this is in the form of some standards, some professional standards for responsibility within the digital transformation space. And we're also going to talk about using a model, right? In all of the iterations of the things that we've been doing and shifting to and changing responsibilities, having a clear model and a pathway really makes it much more manageable. And it's not about putting something else down on top of the people who are creating the experiences, but it's really more about defining it more succinctly so that we can get to personalization, which is really all we're moving toward anyway, right? This is the thing that the golden egg. This is the opportunity that we've been waiting for, because now we have the technology that can help us get there. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We'll have some time at the end for some discussion, and I hope that some of this piques your interest because I'd love to talk to folks about what your take is. We're going to present some concepts and we're going to give you some concrete things, but discussion is always good, and feedback is for sure welcome and encouraged strongly. So any of the thoughts that pop in your brain as we blaze through this would be awesome. Would love to hear that stuff. So I'm going to start out with the very next slide, which is this one. I'm going to start out with identifying and understanding the objects. And when we talk about objects, we're talking about learning objects. And so the graphic that you see here isn't brand new. It's some work that took place right around the 2015 time frame. And this was a pivotal point in understanding learning objects as they relate to the design of experiences. And when we talk about what teachers and educators do, creating a line between planning for teaching and designing for experience, those are two very separate things. And one is creative and one is also, but it's not student-centered. So this really is a base level. We're going to set the floor with this. This is where we start to identify what are the characteristics of those learning objects and how do they help us as educators to bring back more humanity and move more explicitly into personalized learning. So this scale from left to right is essentially sophistication of learning objects. And so you can see at the very top on the left-hand side, it's pointing to more instructional planning, more automated learning, and that's relative to teacher time, right? And what kids are doing. So at the very left-hand side, you see the digital document. And this is sort of the least sophisticated learning object that one might consider using when you're building an experience within the digital space. And this is really, it's a paragraph of text, right? It's a Word doc, it's something, it's static. Somebody typed it in, I snagged it off of the Googles. It doesn't really do anything, right? It's not interactive. It's not necessarily connected to anything else. It may or may not have a link in it to go somewhere else. And if it does, guess who's going to do that? It's going to be the teacher. And so, it just is. And it lives in isolation, and it's good. It's fine. It's perfectly fine content. You can build your design around those objects. And yet, you're causing yourself more work, right? That's human time, because you've got to go curate those, you've got to type them, you've got to create the stuff, and so that equals a lot of time, a lot of extra time. And so we move up the scale in terms of sophistication, and we start talking about single loop animations, and these are very basic types of things. It's like things flying in from the left-hand side in a PowerPoint presentation, or it's dissolving, or it's whatever, it's things that spin. It doesn't really create interaction, but it is creating a little bit more movement, which is better, right? It's not the static text page, and it can create some more interest, it can create some more engagement, and yet it's pretty low on the end of sophistication and activity and what you can do with this information, because it's still one way, right? It's a passive engagement between the learner and this information. And so without the active engagement, the learning is less sticky. So consider that as well. So we move up the scale into video, and this is sort of the first time, as I think about this is actually an interesting point at which we start switching over into something that the end user or the learner can actually manipulate, right? And so this would be me as a learning designer or as a teacher. I've recorded myself talking about dinosaurs, biology, whatever the content is, and I distribute that to the kids, the learners, and all of a sudden, as a learner, I can watch the whole thing from end to end. I can pause, I can fast forward, I can stop, I can rewind, I can replay the entire thing, and that really helps me to now control how I'm getting the information. And as a teacher, I was an elementary teacher for many years, and I used a lot of video in my designs, and it was interesting to watch students who weren't used to receiving information that way, and some of them would just blaze through from beginning to end, and they got it. Some of them, the majority of them, needed to stop, right? They needed to stop and control the input in order for them to do something with it. And so this is interesting because that's a little bit more sophisticated, right? It requires more sophistication on the designer's end, on the learning designer's end or the teacher's end, and it requires a little more engagement from the learner's end, and that's good, because then all of a sudden they're interacting with it. So we move up then from there into collections, and again another sophistication point that we're increasing, and this is all of a sudden collections of video, text, learning, a bunch of different learning objects, and I've moved them all together, and they're contextualized all of a sudden, and now it's beginning to start feeling like a little world about biology, and I can move and maneuver and navigate through all of these things that have been collected into one spot. And now all of a sudden I can start choosing also, right? I can be led to some might lead to another. I can start going out and finding things and grabbing those things that are meaningful to me, and then moving around with them and doing something with them, and building my own understanding as a learner with those things. And that all of a sudden, if you think about students moving through that type of an experience, what is the teacher doing? The teacher's not guiding them at every step. They have the means and the resources to go do that themselves. And that's awesome, right? Because all of a sudden we're freeing up the teacher to continue to move and navigate around the either the virtual or the real classroom or the hybrid, and start attending to individual students' needs. And really start focusing on things like SEL, right? SEL's, it's still important, it is, and it will continue to be. And we do have to focus on those things, and the relationships, they're very important, yes. And if you can't free up your time as a teacher, it becomes heavy, right? It becomes heavy. And so the more sophisticated the learning objects, the more time you're going to buy back. So this point between collections and feedback is actually kind of cool. It's interesting to me because all of a sudden we're tiptoeing right over the line from the instructional planning into the more automated learning side, but we're also then using objects that do some of the things that the teacher might do in the form of feedback and answering questions and providing some additional levels of information. And this is pivotal, right? This is where all of a sudden, as a teacher, I don't have to be right alongside to answer every question, because my learning object is going to be able to start doing that. And because the input is coming from the learner, the machine then takes what it knows, can give additional information, can begin to lead them in different directions, And that's a big deal. That's a big deal because if you design with those, you're creating time, you're building in time for humanity. And that's, I think, an important piece. That's a critically important piece as we design experiences. So moving up into coding, this is amateur coding, right? This isn't, I'm going to go make an app. This is, I'm going to go create a website. I'm going to use WordPress, and I'm going to create a web environment where my learners can be. And it's another step of independence or personalization that allows student agency to be exercised in a space, in a digital space. And we see those types of considerations happening within the physical classroom where personalization is being designed and leveraged, and the same type of thing, right? The thinking is the same. The thinking behind that design is the same. It's just that the output or the medium is digital versus in person. The considerations are still there. And then we move all the way up into the highly designed digital courseware, and this is where the professional coders are creating the worlds. They're working with the educators, and what you see is an immersive experience then. And this is where the learner is really stepping into a world and moving through content, multiple modules, a bunch of different pathways that can be designed into that courseware, a lot of different levels. Adaptive nature of the product really helps the students to move forward. And it's doing things like predicting and very sophisticated things like that. So if you're thinking about your learning objects that you currently have, where do those align within that scale? And are you down on the left-hand side, really spinning your wheels and working hard, or are you going to be over on the right-hand side, which is really, I'm working smarter, right? And doesn't mean I'm not being considerate of my whole range of learners, but I'm using the building blocks that are going to get me the most bang. So understand that. That's helping us to understand the objects. The next scale that I want to share is this one, and this actually came out in an earlier report. The thumbnail is there on the slide, and you can download that from the Learning Council website. And this is really how we begin to evaluate. Now that we can identify them on that sophistication scale, and we can begin to think about, how could I use these for greatest impact, and to start leveraging the student agency that I should be building in. How do I evaluate those, and how do I think about them in terms of granularity? And this is really then a scale of granularity and sort of aggregation. And so you see at the very top, the orange box represents some amateur authorware, and you think about the concept level being again a bit of text, very similar to the left-hand side in the previous slide. This concept level is really, it's discrete. It doesn't connect. It does its one thing, and it does it fairly well. But it doesn't connect, and it's not interactive, and it's not going to go do something, right? And so it just is. And you've got to do the work to connect the dots and make the lateral connections. If you then skip into contextualization, that contextualization level all of a sudden takes those discrete bits and pieces, mushes them together into a thing called biology, and now all of a sudden you've got a bunch of discrete pieces that are now that have connections now drawn between them to help you to make some meaning as a learner, and that's very helpful. And then we move all the way up into courses or ebooks that we can create, right? As amateur sort of authors, we can create those ebooks and distribute them, and learners can move back and forth, and they can navigate within the context of those courses, which is sort of all of those things culminating in that one course or that ebook. The next level up from that is the professionally coded applications and resources and software. And this is where we move from short form to long form. And short form is relative to an applet or an app, for example, in the same way that the concept is relatively discrete and has a finite function. The applet or app is your math app, or it's a spelling app. It's a single use type of an application. It probably does a really good job, right? It probably does a fine job of helping learners understand numeracy, right? But that's all it does. It doesn't have a lot of modules. It doesn't have sort of tendrils that go off and connect to other things. It just is. and it's happy being what it is, and it doesn't go any further, right? There's no context to it. As a designer, you're going to have to go point to that, and be explicit about pointing to it, and then it's finite, and the learner is going to have to jump back into whatever it is that the larger experience is, and that movement creates a clumsy design, right? So at the sophistication scale, that Appler app, not as sophisticated, right? So we move up into courses and courseware, and now we're talking about things that are worlds, right? This is a course on biology. It has all the things that I need in it, and I can move and modulate within the course or the courseware, and it's going to help me when I don't understand. And it's going to allow me to move fast and faster than at my own pace, rather. And that's a strength, right? That's the kind of building block that I want to use, because I'm all of a sudden ungating, I'm fostering student agency, and I'm building learner identity, because now they're making the decisions, they're testing it out, they're failing forward, they're doing all the things that we know are strength building for learners. And then we move all the way up into that collection sort of a realm where now all of a sudden we're using AI, right? And we've got machine learning is being used, and there's predictive functions being used within the software, and now the machine is actually helping me to move and understand, and that's fantastic, because again, we're buying back more humanity time. Doesn't mean I'm glued to the screen. It means that in the context of my learning experience that has been designed, that I am also contributing to. I got all this stuff, right? I can use it when I need to. I know what to go find. I know where to go get it. And it's not only easy to get to, but it's helping me because it's giving me feedback, and I'm making the choices, and it's helping me down the path to personalization. So that scale layered on top of the other one gives us a sense of, all right, learning objects out there in the world. What are the more sophisticated? What are the least sophisticated? And how do I want to use these objects in my design? I've used the Lego analogy, and I'm such a Lego guy, right? And so at this point, we have to take our gigantic box of Lego, dump it out onto the floor, and build something new, right? And we want to use the best building blocks. We want to use the smartest building blocks that we can possibly get our hands on. And thankfully, now we have a bunch of them, right? We just heard from resource providers in the last 2 days that are awesome, right? This is the kind of stuff that we should be building with. So this next slide is another step toward understanding, right? And this is where we start to say, all right, we got all these things. We understand now which ones are sophisticated and which ones are going to be higher leverage. We understand the nature of some of the authored resources that might be out there, and now we're starting to think about, oh gosh, I've got 100 applications in hopefully a dashboard that since March of last year, my school system dumped into our ecosystem, right? And so my district all of a sudden went out and bought stuff, or maybe like a lot of systems, the teachers went out and bought things, and it was different by classroom within a building. It was different by building, and we created mud. We just did. And I remember the feeling when I was in the classroom and we started down that digital path, and I would talk to colleagues, and our conversation was about, gosh, I feel heavy all of a sudden. I feel like there's a weight, and we couldn't identify it. So this graphic actually represents some of that, and represents some early learning that the Learning Council did to help to address that, because always listening, right? The Learning Council is always listening to the field and responding with information and more research, and then some solutions to try. And this was the first time that the problem was identified, really. And what you see in the very center of that graphic is sort of a stair-stepped representation of grade levels. And within each one of those grade levels, the learning objects are changing, right? And so you've got different things going on from grade to grade to grade to grade. And then even in some of the systems that I've seen, within a grade level, you've got different things. And so students are jumping back and forth between things and constantly code switching. And teachers are the same. They're going, oh my gosh, I love this app, but I love that one, and I love this one, and there's a book over here, and there's all these things, and what do I do, and how do I use it? And it's a mind blower, right? And so this represents it represents a digital load. We created a digital burden for our professionals unwittingly, because those are all great things, right? All the things that we dumped into our dashboard with single sign-on that kids and student and learners and teachers can now get to. It's a lot, and how do we use it all, and how do we design with it, and where do we go? And those are all very real questions. And so it was identified that being the problem, what was missing was some routing, right? Where's the air traffic control for this? Where's the logistics capacity? And that was missing, and that's still missing from a good number of systems. We have some partners who are now tackling that logistics level, that workflow level, and they're seeing some success. But it's important that we face that, and we say, all right, yeah, we got a digital load, we've got a burden that we placed upon ourselves. Now what do we do? And so does that start looking like evaluating the resources that you have? It does. What are you going to use? Start by understanding what they are and what the high levers are, right? Start understanding what the structure for your learning design is going to need to look like, and then follow that to start identifying which ones maybe aren't as high leverage as you thought they were going to be, or maybe you didn't consider things like business model in the procurement of that particular resource. So this helps us, because now we can say, phew, we've identified the problem, now we can fix it, and now we have the basis for some understanding. We've identified a couple of needs, and now we can move into things like establishing common vocabulary, because now we want to start building the solutions and start going to do, right? So in terms of understanding, this particular document is super helpful. If you haven't gotten this yet, go get it, and just go to it's available on the EduJedi Learning Council website. Go get it. It's big. Use it for your springtime light reading when the sun's out or it's raining and you're not going outside to ride your bike. The dictionary is good because it starts to give us some of that common vocabulary, and so I'm not going to go through each one of these sections. I'm just going to sort of glance over the tops of the categories, and you can go dig around yourself. But I'll give you some examples of what each one of these sections is. So, for example, the actions category. This one really starts talking through functions of the code that do things, right? It's generally the things that live discretely. It's the thing that the code tells it to do, and without involvement from other processes, right? It's how it was designed. The design really talks about the aesthetics, or the dressing, or the navigation, or interoperability. It talks about user onboarding. There's information there about accessibility and about engagement strategies and things like that covered under design. Controls is a pretty important category, because as you think about using those higher sophistication level resources and those apps or applications that are ranging within the course and courseware sort of level, knowing what kind of controls are positive for you in terms of designing with it. The controls are important because you will need to have the ability to modify the user's experience. And if your learning object is too rigid or doesn't provide that flexibility, then you can't provide a very flexible experience, and it becomes clumsy to work with. Customization is very, very connected to that. And this is where we start talking about individualization versus personalization. And so for individualization, it's important also to understand the difference between the two, because there's a distinction, right? And we have to understand that as we build a common vocabulary and move forward. So individualization then refers to decisions that the teacher or the educator is making for the learner. And personalization then refers to models where the learners are in control, right? They're exercising learner agency. They have the options to decide what methods and materials are going to best suit their needs, and then go do that, right? And so in customization, you want to look for those two things, right? Where are you understanding that the learning objects in your design falls within the understanding of individualization and personalization? Because we are ultimately moving toward personalization. We have to. That's the way that we need to be moving. Instruction talks about this category talks about lesson giving qualities, right? So within your learning object, a consideration should always be what lesson giving qualities are built into the resource that I'm using to design this experience, and even are there, right? And so it talks about content delivery. There's consideration in there for tutoring, for feedback, how students are able to get support from the learning object for deeper understanding of a concept or an idea. Mechanisms really talks about digital structures that create a series of steps, and so you could consider that a mechanism is like a loop, right? It's a series of actions that are built into a single discrete system, and they're meant to work in sequences or loops. Those are the mechanisms that we're talking about here. Business model I mentioned before, and this is actually something fairly important because this dictates what your learning object is going to do once you put it into your design, and it's sometimes not completely thought through the whole way, and so, for example, freemium isn't free. It's not, and so somebody's getting paid on at some point in one of those free resources. It's going to have in-app purchases, or it's going to have something that derails the experience and causes the learners to go left instead of going right. And you don't want that. And if you didn't think about business model before, now's the time. Go figure it out, learn about it, and be cognizant of that, because it's important as you build stuff, learning designs. Hostile characteristics is very connected, right? These are the intrusive characteristics that are intended to get up in your face, right? This is the box that pops up that says upgrade to platinum now, and then all of a sudden a school system of fifth graders is clicking that button, or any of the other buttons that could pop up if you hadn't thought about hostile characteristics, and that's where mud happens, right? That's where somebody has a bad experience and you don't get them back after they're gone. Getting the attention back is really hard in engagement, and that's obviously one of the things that people are challenged with now, right? Engagement. All of those engagement issues that teachers are talking about. It's not how many masks you can put on. It's not about the wig. It's not about the tap dance. It's not about that. It isn't. It's about how engaging is the design that you have created, and you want to be mindful of things like hostile characteristics, because it doesn't help you. It's not going to help. The last category is really sort of the catch-all. These are all terms and ideas that are important to understand, and so what I like to think about in terms of this dictionary, and I'll share some examples here. Right here. Oop, there we go. This is a great example. So when I was in my last school district, I was the chief academic officer, and my partner in crime was the chief information officer, and we skipped down the golden path arm in arm, and that was the design, and we needed to be talking the same talk and walking the same walk. And so that meant that I needed to understand some technology stuff, and he needed to understand some teaching and learning stuff, so that inevitably we could speak articulately about either thing. And this dictionary is a fantastic example of something that would help sit between those two people, so that you can have that common vocabulary. So this is an example of trigger procedures, and a trigger is a point in the system. The user gets to it. The system automatically goes to the next function via the trigger, and the trigger could be input from the user. It could be any of those things. And so there's some technologies, some tech speak in here that I didn't understand, and yet needed to understand, because it's one of my professional responsibilities. We're going to get into that when we talk about standards for professionals. And I need to know this, right? I can't just go, hey, IT, deal with that. That's not me. I'm tapping out. No, I actually need to understand that, because who's going to get the questions? Me. And I need to be able to speak intelligibly about that. So understand those things. The next example is gating, right? This is where we're using some concepts from gaming, and we're gamifying. And gamifying doesn't necessarily mean that you're jumping into a game, right? It's using ideas of gamification, like gating, and it's important to understand this as a concept, because you want to make sure that you not only have the ability to gate, but also the ability to ungate. Because as you're designing these personalized experiences that address pace, place, time, and space, You want to make sure that you're setting a floor, you're setting a high floor for that learning experience, but you're probably going to be taking the ceiling off. And taking the ceiling off means that you now have students moving at their own pace. And you have to understand that the design within that digital space has to be ungated in order for them to do that. So in order to allow those students to move forward at their own pace, and so that's really important. But that's a great example within their hostile characteristics we talked about before. They're intrusive. It's not nice. It's something that's gonna mess up your cleverly designed experience, and you just don't want to do it. You don't want to put things into your ecosystem and into your design, especially if you're a central office or you're CNI, or teaching and learning, or IT, or the combination of all of them. If you're approving something that has hostile characteristics, and you're saying this thing is okay for you to use in your design, and yet it has hostile characteristics, guess what? That thing's not going to get used, and you're going to waste time and money on it. So identify those early on. I can't stress that more. Modal, this is another input and feedback type of a device, right? We talked about the sophistication scale earlier. The modal is a dialogue. It's something that appears based on user input and asks for some more input or a decision or some information, and then it moves you forward into another area within the resource or within the experience that has been built. And so this is it forces a decision, it forces interaction, it creates engagement, and it's higher on the sophistication scale. It's something to understand. This is another critical piece, and this is a great example to share because along the lines of making things easy to use, if you can't get to the information, it's just not going to get used. Nesting is that, and how the consideration is, how do the resources that I'm using nest information, and how do I, as a designer of a learning experience, how do I nest information, and as a student, how do I nest information, and how can I get to it more quickly? And that's a consideration. It's not always something that you look for or think about, but it should be, because all of those things go together as you're building that Lego learning design, and all of those things go together to make either a good experience or a not so good experience. And those then tie directly to all of the data about students checking out, about students not even attending, about bad experiences and arguments about screen time. All of those things, right? All of those things are directly relevant to these examples and to what's in this dictionary. So super important. So now we're going to jump into understanding professional responsibilities. Before we get into the model for design, this is now that we know all of the things, right? We know all of the objects, we understand them, we have a common vocabulary. Now we need to understand, what is my role as an administrator, as a central office administrator, as a building administrator? What is my role, and how do I know I'm doing the thing that I'm supposed to be doing? Right? This is stuff that they didn't teach you in admin school. It isn't, right? And sometimes people picked it up along the way. If you're lucky, you experienced your way into these things, or it was modeled for you. However, for the majority of folks, it hasn't been addressed. And so this set of standards is unique in that this now tells us, if I'm a chief academic officer, what are my responsibilities for selection and management of digital curriculum and systems and resources, right? What is my responsibility as a CAO for that? Because previously, I probably didn't think that deeply about it, right? And yet, it's part of my job. And so this is just a few examples. There's more within the dictionary. But what we're talking about now is that I, as a chief academic officer, I have to think about actual costs. We did when it was paper as well, right? In paper, it was the consumables that maybe you didn't think about having a 2-year life on the shelf, and that they were going to need to be budgeted for further down the road. Yep, same thing for licensing. And I need to understand the business model. I need to understand the licensing. I need to understand the legal language. I need to understand the DSA. I need to deeply understand the DSA. And I can't just hand that off to the legal department if I even have one, right? In our smaller systems, your chief academic officer or your assistant superintendent of teaching and learning is, yes, all those things. And so, yep, you do have responsibility for those. and you want to make sure that you're asking questions and exercising that responsibility. The next example I'm sharing talks about progressively working toward individualization and, much more importantly, personalization, right? And so at this point in our conversation, if you haven't already gotten to the point where you're talking about how do we personalize learning within your system, take tomorrow to figure out how you're going to bring that conversation up, because it's necessary. And now all of a sudden we have the resources that we can use to actually do that. Until very recently, it's been a little bit clunky, but now we've got resources and we can. And so since we know better, we should. And so also moving toward digital pathways, right? So we've had a lot of conversation about personalized pathways and about increasing agency and student choice and things like that. And so how are we using that in the context of the lessons and the course building and the design and the concept of workflow, right? Because workflow is where we go back to that digital load and we think, gosh, if only I had a workflow design in order to navigate this. Yeah, you have a responsibility for thinking about that. As an administrator, you do. The standards for teachers layer up on top of that, right? This is all sort of an iterative document. And so the slight difference or the modification here is that teachers have a responsibility for composition and systems, for learning design, and for student oversight. Not brand new, right? However, composition in systems, that's a little new, right? So I might not be as versed in my school district's LMS as I should be for composition. And if I'm not, am I advocating for that? Am I advocating for the PD that I need in order to go do that? Because now that's a professional responsibility. Before March, all of the digital transformation was largely seen as an initiative, and it's a requirement now. It's a requirement. And so composition and systems, it's a professional responsibility. You actually have to do that. And so that equals, in my mind, as soon as I hear that, as the teaching and learning guy, PD, boom, number one, I'm going to go do it. And I'm going to help my people be well equipped to go design engaging experiences. Standards for students, another layer. So this is really talking about students' responsibilities regarding the user interface and their use of the digital resources and advocacy within the experience. So this speaks to how do I, as a student, know what to choose and how to use it to meet my needs, and then what to do if I don't find the things that I need, and be able to evaluate that as well. And so that's not something that is natural. We're going to have to teach that. And it's the same thing as any of the other learning concepts, right? It's like critical thinking. We have to teach that. Growth mindset. We have to help them to learn that and how to exercise that. And in some ways we have to help learners to exercise agency and understand what agency actually is, because that's not something that we have built systems around, and yet we have to do that, right? We have to be student-centered. And as we move forward with our design. So that's sort of a glance off the top at these standards for administrators, teachers, and students. And we're going to be developing these further with our partner districts and educators, and we're going to be continuing to evolve these and start to help systems to use them and actually apply them within the context without overburdening the system. Because it doesn't have to be burdensome, and it shouldn't be, right? It should just be natural and organic. So those are the standards. I encourage you to take a look at those and start to digest what might this look like within my own space and my own context, because that's the place where we want to make sure that we get to. So the last thing that I want to share before we jump into some questions and I start poking at people about thoughts. The model that you're using to design the experiences has to be created to support the thing that you want to do, right? So if we're thinking about our education system having built to support an industrial structure, it was, and it did so, right? It did so fairly well, and it created relative robots, and people were all forced to do exactly the same thing at the same pace, and right, walk in lines and sit in rows, and you can ask questions, but only ask the questions that you're told to ask, and right, it was that, and so what we're proposing here, and the work of the EduJedi is really unseating that, and we already know that didn't work, right? The old way didn't work, and so there's some models around that we've been using that you're familiar with, and Addie's is the example here. Addie's, it's a great model, right? It's fine. It does what it was intended to do, and yet it's teacher centric, right? And so what we want to make sure that we help people to understand is that you can't design a student-centered process around a model that is not designed for that. And so the EduJedi really took a look at how do we help people to design a personalized learning experience that leverages the technology that sort of unseats some of these other concepts. So you'll take a look at this at the Addie's model. It's 45 years old. And so it goes through sort of some analysis steps, some development, some design, some implementation, things like that. And the vocabulary that's included in there talk about class structure, talks about course structure, talks about things that imply seating, that imply passing time and seat time, and consideration for teacher creation, right? And so if you're creating content, your capacity to do that is probably minimal, right? And in the scope of the larger job, having time to create content is not even a thing anymore. You can't, right? We've got resources. We got resources out there called the internet, and there's a lot of great stuff out there. Turns out there's a lot of good things there. You want to be mindful of those. So contrasting that, right? The EduJedi model breaks up the idea of the experience creation, and it breaks it up into a couple of different sections there, and they're represented in those bars, right? And so there's a workflow and logistics design section, and then there's a discovery design section. And so the workflow really talks about how are we setting the path, laying the bricks, how are we considerate of things like standard sets, like instructional guides, things like district requirements and prioritized standards and things like that. How are we thinking about all of those things, and then how are we considering how a learner will move through that in a conceptual way, and then how are we designing that so that the learner has lateral connectivity. They can move up. We've ungated or we've gated, and then how are we using the resources that we have in terms of digital resources and things like that, and live synchronous and asynchronous experiences. How are we using all of those things to create this immersive experience that is then positive and sticky? And that's sort of the workflow. And how are we moving around that? And how are we calendaring? And how are we maximizing the adults' time? And maybe they're not in classrooms. All of those considerations jump into that workflow design, the logistics design. Beneath that, then, we're talking about discovery design, and we're thinking more about how are the learners exercising agency and being able to navigate and move through this world that I've then designed, and what are the decision points going to be, and where am I going to go with this? And so through this model, then you can imagine that what we're designing is actually something that is going to start leveraging PDL. It's going to start leveraging all the things that we know are strong in terms of learning design. This model can support that. The last one is really continuation or termination, and that's not new, right? Is this the end, and we move on to something different, or am I simply going to then continue into sort of an organic flow, continuing forward? So that's a sort of a very brief model, a brief of the model, and so what I want to make sure that I share, if I can have my mouse, there we go. There's a lot of text on here, and you can read it later, but really, if you consider if you consider examples, right? So if we were to break out each one of those different sections, the scope would be talking about aligning standards, whether it's math or biology or whatever it is that you're talking about. You're aligning standards. You're looking at scope and sequence. You're looking at sort of district requirements. You're thinking about instructional guides, and then you're moving from that, having considered all of those sort of the scope and sequence of this experience, into the mapping or the idea curation sort of a level. And this is where we're talking about entry points, right? We're talking about how are we personalizing. We're talking about what will students be doing? What will their experience be? We're curating ideas. Are we going to bring in some PBL? Are we going to have an experiential hands-on component when we're thinking about that? The design area, you could think about that as the design and building area where you're connecting to courseware, you're looking for the digital resources, you're looking at modules, you're starting to think about which building blocks, which Lego blocks am I going to start using, and start connecting the dots, right? You're going to connect the dots between all of those things, and you're going to think about the synchronous and asynchronous nature of your design. And so, for example, if your students are moving through with math, what is that pathway going to look like, and how are you actually going to help them get there? Implementation, again, this is what is the real work going to look like, right? Once they step into that world, have you thought about single sign-on? If you don't have it, or how are you going to manage that? How are students going to be? How do you see them logging in from home, and is there a difference in it, or isn't there? How do you manage then with the hybrid portion of your class? If you got 50% of your kids there and 50% of your kids abroad, what's that going to look like, right? Similar sorts of considerations for logistics, and then we jump into termination or continuance, and is that this, and then we move on to the next, or is that a flow? And so we're going to have a lot more work coming out. I share this as a really quick example because I know that we're running short on time. Really quick example, but we're going to be working with educators in the next year to come up with examples of designs that have been created using this model to help us to start identifying ways that it can help, and things that have been done. So stay tuned for that. Some ways that the EduJedi model is different. I think I mentioned most of these, but really most critically, it's learner-centric and not teacher-centric. And so it's really thinking through, it's addressing that time, space, pace, and place, because that's personalization, right? That's where we're headed. It really talks about goal setting that isn't course or class related, right? We're debunking the seat time idea because that's no longer a thing. We're talking about automated synchronicity between standards and district things. Those things are meshing now, and we're allowing the machine to do that for us. Not that we're taken out of it, but that's a load we don't need. The machine's smart and can do that, and it's what machines do well. So we can allow that difference to be leveraged. We're looking at problem-based learning being originated by the learner and not necessarily the instructor, because that's where we know the learning gets sticky. And so that discovery, right, and the agency is built into the model as well. So those are all critical components of the thing that we will be working toward. This is where you can find that, right? This is where the standards live. Definitely download the dictionary, download the standards, and keep your eye out on on No Story and on the Learning Council website, because we'll be getting some notifications out there for people to start engaging, and definitely looking for people to dig in. So, Lonnie, how are we doing on time over there?
We only have 4 minutes.
Okay.
To ask this set of questions, to throw them out there at people.
Perfect. Yeah. Fantastic. So I timed it perfectly.
Yeah.
So what I wanted to throw out there to folks who are participating, we've been talking about a lot of responsibilities. We've been talking a lot about sort of these understanding the sophistication and learning design and personalization, all of the things. And given now the current context, right? We've learned and we've moved forward and we're continuing to evolve. What I'd like to hear from folks and what I would love to get as in terms of input is what new responsibilities have popped up that you're experiencing relative to these things, right? Learning design, how has that changed, or has it? Administrators, what new things are popping into your conversations and up on your radar that maybe weren't there before? Teachers, for sure. Learners, yeah, right. What new things are popping up from learners that we maybe didn't see, or maybe they're evolving in a really positive way? And that's fantastic. User interface and experience, right? The same sort of thing. What are we seeing and what have we learned as we've gone into this experience?
Well, we've got some of the Woonsocket people already on because they're going to be going next. And so I'd love to hear from them. What do they think about this so far? Some of them came in towards the middle of it. So what about your new responsibilities, Woonsocket? What are you experiencing?
Hi guys, I'm Angie Holt. I'm the Director of Curriculum and Development for Woonsocket Education Department. New responsibilities, that seems like an ever-evolving consideration during this time recently. First and foremost, I think your number one here, learning design, has been, the shift with our learning design has been transformative in education. So I feel that that's really our starting point. And ensuring access and equity for students. I think those are the two big things that we're looking for to make sure happens, equity and access for not only our students, but our teachers as well, and our support staff, and just making sure everyone has the opportunities to engage in the work that needs to be done.
Okay, great. Well, I just want to thank Chris because we're now at time. Chris, you did a great job walking us through a tremendous amount of data that everyone can find in the dictionary under the special reports.
Right, for sure. Yeah, I'm always happy to hear from folks. Keep that conversation live.
The next thing we want to do is we want to hear from Kendall from Blocksi. I don't know much about Blocksi, so I'm hoping that you're going to walk us through for a few minutes here, kind of who you are and what you're all about. My staff are excited about Blocksi. So why don't you go ahead and share? If you do you need to take the screen or share video?
If you don't mind, if I could share, I do have a presentation. I'm not exactly sure if it's the one they sent you, so I've got it up if you don't mind me sharing my screen.
No, go ahead and share because I somehow I didn't get those slides anyway, so go ahead.
Okay. It said this will stop
yes.
other screen sharing, so I'll just continue. Okay. Well, thank you very much. Very happy to be here. So my name is Kendall Howell. I am the Customer Success Manager with Blocksi. Thank you all for your time. I would like to introduce Blocksi. We are an in and out of school content filtering and classroom management system. So we're that all in one solution for any of your Chromebooks and Windows devices. Our company headquarters is based out of Palo Alto, California, but our employees, they're spread out across the states as well as international. I myself am on the East Coast. I am in South Carolina. So thanks again for having me. Very happy to be here with all of you today. Now, Blocksi is purely cloud-based, and it's an app extension that's pushed out via your Google Admin Console or MSI file via Azure Active Directory for those Windows devices. The installment and rollout of Blocksi is very instantaneously done and very seamless to deploy across your district. We can have you up and running within 15, 20 minutes. So very easy setup there. There's none proxy, there's no hardware, no extra configuration there. Again, it's purely cloud-based. So some of our main features are listed here. We began our cloud-based filtering content filtering back in 2011, and our filtering extends to in and out of school, as well as filtering for the classroom. We have many filtering options across the web and YouTube available, including that web category-based filtering, customizable block allow list, application filtering, keyword filtering, and granular YouTube filtering with deeper controls to really secure that YouTube environment, so to help you guys ensure it to be used as a more safe educational platform. Our classroom management system has been in the market since 2016, and this allows teachers to monitor the student screens, push out content, restrict certain sites, or lock the students down to specific content, run safe, secure testing environments, lock down browsers, close down tabs on student devices, and so much more. It's a tool really to help make the classroom that are filled with all of these devices or remote learning much more manageable for the teachers. Our solution offers both district-wide web browser and YouTube analytics also for admins, and the same insightful analytics to teachers as well per class session that they have. It identifies the sites visited by the users, the time spent on the sites, search engine keyword queries, YouTube videos, and so much more. As well, within our solution, we do have our student safety, so that monitors across Gmail, all of G Suite. It scans and detects instances related to self-harm, suicide, threats, toxicity, cyberbullying. We do have an alerting system in place as well that allows you to configure your own types of alerts. So it can be based off of different categories that we have pre-selected for you, anything around student safety, any specific keywords that you may want to be alerted on, you can set all of those up yourself. Lastly, our anti-theft solution, that can help keep an inventory of all of your devices and track any lost or stolen devices by pinpointing them on a Google map, identifying their last known online location, capture screenshots every 3 to 5 seconds of the activity on that stolen device, and engage the webcam to take actual live photos. All these options that can be disabled if you desire, but they are there to help the chances of you recovering those lost or stolen devices. We do have 4 main dashboards, which are the admin dashboard. This is where the dashboard that houses the content filtering, the web analytics, the student safety and alert parameters, the anti-theft controls. We have our teacher dashboard, so that's for the teachers to monitor and manage their classrooms. We have a principal dashboard, so that's for the principals to access their analytics and student safety for the kids that they manage specifically. And then as well, our parent dashboard for outside of school hours. This helps parents to enforce bedtime and control and restrict certain times for social media, gaming, streaming, things to that nature. Parents also have access to an Android or iOS app for the parent dashboard. With the PD, we do offer a free PD at no additional cost for anybody in your tech department, so your sysadmins, your network specialists, your tech coaches, your instructional coaches. We also offer PD directly to the teachers if you would like as well, to help them understand how to use all the tools that are available to them to really get the best use out of their teacher dashboard experience. So PD is always there, and we have tons of resources for your teachers as well. If you would like to schedule a demo, set up a free trial, receive pricing, or more information about our solution, we would love to hear from you. Please reach out to our sales manager. I have her contact information listed here. Her name is Sandy Rice, and she'll be happy to provide you with whatever you're looking for. Thanks so much to all of you. Appreciate your time and interest.